So it's my pleasure to welcome back to the show Mac, better known as Good Politic Guy. Mac, thanks for taking the time.
Yeah, of course. I appreciate it. You got a good show going on here, so anytime.
Thank you very much. I want to encourage the audience to follow Mac at Good Politic Guy. You can also find his YouTube channel by the same name on YouTube. So this invite was sparked by a thread I saw you put out there on Andrew Yang and the Forward Party. I was curious if you could just give a little breakdown. I've seen a lot of discourse online about that in recent months.
Yeah, I mean, listen, I feel like a lot of people when Andrew Yang was running in the Democratic primary thought that he had some good ideas, right? And I agreed with some of them. Universal basic income. I think that's something that most leftists would be able to get behind. But now he's just gone off on this bizarre tangent with this party where it seems like not only is he not aggressively pushing for some of the solid, policy proposals he was previously pushing for, but you can't even seem to get a straight answer from him or anybody else working within this fucking party on what exactly they're even trying to do with it, right? I mean, I've been, communicating with Andrew Yang, kind of been a one-way communication because it's hard to get an answer out of this guy on anything. But I mean, you can go and, look at some of his tweets that he's been posting, and you'll sometimes see me below in the replies and, just asking basic questions like, hey, do you support Medicare for all? Do you support the Green New Deal? Do you support this? Do you support that? And you're just never able to get a straight answer. And the reason for that is pretty obvious, in my opinion. It's because this is a party that was formed with, a coalition of basically neocons, former Bush Republicans, corporate Democrats, and it's basically just trying to be a third party, not in the sense that they're actually trying to get rid of the core problems with our current two-party system, which is, obviously dysfunctional and corrupt. But the fact of the matter is, at the end of the day, this forward party that Andrew Yang is trying to launch is definitely going to be taking donations from corporate America. And so it's going to have the same exact fundamental flaws as both of our other corrupt political parties that we have right now. So it seems just kind of pointless at the end of the day. And it's been really entertaining seeing him implode and just completely fail to answer basic questions about what his party is fighting for.
Yeah, I saw one. I don't remember which channel he was on, but someone pressed him on that and said, what's your platform? You actually do have to take a position on issues. And his response was always to go fall back on this. The country's too divided. Partisanship is a problem, and it seems like that's the only messaging that he has. Has that also been your
Right.
experience?
Right. Yeah. No, I mean, it's like, he makes some good points about like some of the problems with our two-party system, right? I, as a leftist, I'm sure many other leftists as well, we don't like the two-party system, but the reason that we don't like it is because we believe, accurately so, that we have two parties that are beholden to the military-industrial complex, that are beholden to corporate America, and, things like getting money out of politics. And, the other funny thing about Andrew Yang and this Forward Party is that he keeps making these broad appeals to like, well, we're going to bring together a bipartisan coalition, right? And in my view, it's like there is a massive gulf between what bipartisanship means among average working class Americans versus what bipartisan means in the context of like the corrupt DC swamp. And it seems like Andrew Yang is trying to go with the corrupt DC swamp bipartisan approach. So, if you were actually a bipartisan party and you were just going to be fighting for, generally things that are supported by broad swath of the American people, then you would be able to come out and be openly in favor of things like, $15 minimum wage, Medicare for all, a Green New Deal, free public college, legalizing marijuana, all of these other various things that are supported by an overwhelming majority of the American people. And he's not willing to even come out and say that he's in favor of any of those policies because they don't really stand for anything. And, honestly, at this party, it's not even that they don't even have a coherent policy agenda. It's that it seems like when they do start picking candidates, they're basically just going to let anybody within their party run on the ticket, anybody who just wants to run as a third party candidate because it looks cool. And you're just going to end up with a slate of candidates that are like either, again, basically just neocon Republicans or just corporate Democrats. And you're not actually solving any problems.
It's seeking power for power's sake more than anything. So to pivot to third parties a little bit more broadly, I'm curious what your thoughts are on the political environment for third parties and outside candidates. We saw what happened with Matthew Ho with kind of being stripped off the ballot there in North Carolina, and it seems like there's still quite a bit of hostility towards anybody who wants to run from the outside. What is your take on the viability of third parties going forward?
Yeah, no, I mean that's kind of that's kind of what sucks the most about this forward party situation is that it's like I 100% would be like a prime example of somebody who would be in favor of having some sort of a legitimate third party, but there's just so many institutional barriers that come along with doing that. One of which is obviously the Democratic Party and the Republican Party, but neither of these parties, especially Democrats, want to see viable left wing, working class populist policy or a party coming from the left flank of them, and so they're willing to use whatever means that they have within their party apparatus to crush, opposition from the left within their own ranks, within the Democratic Party in some of these primaries, but also, their flanks from a lot of these third party candidates as well, or independents who are trying to run in these races. I mean, the Democratic Party, again, in coordination with the Republican Party, they don't want to see any disruption to the established order of things. They don't want to see any, potential viable third party, come into the fray. And if I actually was going to turn it around and give just a little bit of credit to Andrew Yang and one of the policies that we can actually get him to talk about openly, it would be something like ranked choice voting. And I think that
Yes.
if you did have that, widely across the country and, in the entirety of these elections, then you could have basically the narrative that Democrats love to pull out about like, third party candidates being spoilers in these elections. And, oh, all you're going to do is just help the Republican candidate win. If you had something like ranked choice voting, then that entire argument basically goes out the window. And so that would probably be a more viable pathway towards actually having a legitimate third party in this country. But there's just so many institutional electoral barriers that the two-party duopoly has put up to make it damn near impossible, along with the fact that because we basically have institutionalized or legalized bribery in this country in the form of PAC donations and dark money groups and just flooding infinite sums of money into these people's campaign coffers. That's also a discrepancy between any legitimate outsider left-wing third party is you are not going to have the same resources. You have to do grassroots fundraising, and it's just a whole host of different various complicated issues that go into actually doing that.
Yeah, I saw a recent stat that really kind of blew my mind. As a cynic, it blew my mind that it's some 60% of spending on Democratic primaries this cycle is from dark money groups and trusts and things that are untraceable. Um, just absolutely incredible how much money has taken over our politics. So on the left, it seems like there's a lot of people that are sort of discouraged to the point of being disenfranchised from the political, at least the electoral political process. And I think some of it is we've had this debate about like, do we try to take over the Democratic Party through primaries or do we try to go outside party? And both seem very difficult, if not unviable for us at this point. I'm just curious what your thoughts are on our capacity to gain some power politically and which avenue you think would actually bear some fruit.
Yeah, I mean, listen, I'm not somebody who's like fervently against, participating in electoral politics or whatever, but I understand at the same time why so many people are turned off by it and so many people don't really feel like participating in it. So if you do happen to be one of those people who just wants to throw your hands up in the air and, not participate in electoral politics, then my suggestion would be, go join some local organizations, participate in mutual aid, direct action. And honestly, most importantly, if you do happen to work in a place that is, has some potential for union organizing,
Yeah.
that is pretty much the best thing that I think leftists could do right now, because we're starting to see a little bit of a spark here, a little bit of a revitalization of the American labor movement with all of the Starbucks organizing campaigns, the Amazon organizing campaigns, and a bunch of other ones that have sort of jumped into the ring recently. And that in and of itself is far more political power, economic power than even in some cases getting a handful of more a squad members elected into Congress. So I mean, there's definitely like plenty of different avenues that we should be taking right now. And my personal stance on it is basically an all of the above approach. I don't think that it's in the left's best interest to just completely give up on electoral organizing, because, you see the work that, somebody like even Bernie Sanders, sort of a one-man band in many of these instances, but still, getting his voice out there, still able to, nudge us at least in minuscule ways to the left on certain policy issues. And, this recent attempt to block the side deal with Joe Manchin and Chuck Schumer. So there are definitely some benefits to having these members of Congress in there. But at the same time, again, if you're turned off by that, then, try to form a union at your workplace, try to do some local organizing and, do everything that you can.
Yeah, I 100% agree. It's a tool that we shouldn't throw out, but it's not going to be the driver of change. So I'm the labor movement to me is absolutely the route to go in terms of actually seizing real power.
Yeah, well,
But to
if I could just say one more thing about that too,
oh, go
because
ahead. Yeah.
you just kind of reminded me. I mean, if you look back just historically in terms of like where the left or semi-left in this country actually did see significant progress through legislation, you go back to the FDR days, and it's like, well, who do you think was pressuring FDR to actually follow
Mhm.
through on a lot of those left-wing policies? Well, it was the socialists and the communist organizations and even political parties back then who were putting significant pressure on him. So there definitely is some weight that could be held by labor, organizing and union power and stuff like that, as well as having some political electoral representation by socialists, communists, anarchists, whatever you want to call yourself, and utilizing some opportunities, especially with the pretty dire economic situation that average Americans are facing right now, to then utilize that collective pressure to push us in the right direction. I think it's definitely possible because we've seen it take place in even worse situations in terms of how socialism and communism has been demonized throughout American history.
Absolutely, yeah. I think we're seeing some example of this with the rail strike right now, just in terms of the impact that it clearly can have. Obviously, Congress and the Biden administration are going to throw their weight around as well, but I think those workers do very literally have serious power, especially in a tight labor market where it's going to be a lot harder to replace them with scabs. Very literally, you walk off the job. It doesn't really matter if Congress says you're not allowed to strike. Well, we're striking, So there is power there, and I hope they'll choose to leverage it. To talk a little bit more about the electoral side of things, though, I'm curious what your thoughts are on the midterms. I've been thinking for months that it looks like it's going to be a devastating result for the Democrats. That just seemed to be the way that the winds were blowing. With it's a midterm with a Democrat in charge. Usually that's bad news, and they had polled so poorly for the first couple of years. It does appear that the Dobbs decision in particular might be changing some of that. I'm just curious where you think things sit right now.
Yeah, I mean the latest polling data that I've been looking at shows that in all likelihood, I think if Democrats are very, very lucky in these midterm elections, they could hold on to the Senate potentially. They could maybe even pick up a couple seats. It still does look like it's damn near a guarantee, unless something drastic changes, that they are going to lose at least the House of Representatives. But
Yeah.
I mean, as you were saying, I mean, we're seeing this bear out in the polling data, right? It was just a couple months ago where Joe Biden was sitting at in the mid 30s approval, and you had Republicans looking like they were going to walk into a landslide victory in both the House and the Senate. Then you had the overturning of Roe v. Wade. Then you had, the Inflation Reduction Act, which I have many, many criticisms of, and Joe Biden's student debt forgiveness plan, which I also have many criticisms of. But at the same time, I mean, you get into the nitty gritty polling details, and post student debt forgiveness plan, Joe Biden's approval rating among under 30 year olds in this country went up like 10 to 15%, depending on which poll you're looking at. And so I think those things do kind of marginally add up, and definitely seems like the winds are sort of shifting, at least marginally, in Democrats' favor. And so, it just honestly depends at this point between now and November whether or not they're going to continue with the sort of momentum that they have going right now. Are they going to stall out? Are they going to, throw their hands up and, not utilize the power that they have right now at their disposal? And I think that's pretty much just going to be the deciding factor. I mean, Republicans at this point, if you go and look at what they're running on, they got nothing. I mean, all they're doing right now is coming out and screaming about, Joe Biden's big spending plans are driving up inflation and all of this bullshit. I mean, the fact of the matter is you have multiple different issues that could be in the forefront of people's minds, depending on what goes down in the last couple of weeks leading up to the midterms. It could be the economy and inflation. It could be if the Federal Reserve starts or continues to spiral us down into a recession, that could take over as the main issue. Or it could still be, abortion rights, depending on, how many more of these states continue with their extremely reactionary abortion policies and things like that. It's just, at this point, it's hard to tell, but it's definitely looking like a slightly better landscape for Democrats than I would have guessed about, 6 months ago.
Yeah. I'm also curious what you think about Lindsey Graham had come forward with a proposal for federal abortion bans. I think he said it 15 weeks or something like that. But that seems to me to be a very stupid political move. All of the data that I can see seems to suggest that people who are passionate about abortion rights are registering to vote in higher numbers than people who are passionate about other things. So there's the potential, if you bring about a federal bill, right now, for example, in a New York or a California where voters are not concerned about losing abortion rights, at the state level, you may be turning out people to register to vote in those states who now are concerned about a federal abortion ban. Do you think that that has the potential to impact the results in November?
I mean, sure. Yeah, it definitely does. I mean, exactly as you were just saying, if you are somebody who, is living in a state where you feel like you're somewhat protected, well, now he's just come out and said the quiet part out loud. And you know that the second that Republicans take back the House and the Senate, whether that's in these midterms or in 2024, whenever the next time is, they are going to aggressively push for a federal abortion ban, which is like, kind of a complete contradiction from all of the different arguments that we were hearing about so-called states' rights when the overturning of Roe v. Wade happened. You had all of these conservatives coming out and saying, no, don't worry about it. We don't want a federal abortion ban. I think you had Mike Pence, who was like one of the guys who was still calling for it back then. But they were overwhelmingly trying to use this argument that the overturning of Roe v. Wade returns the power back into the hands of the people. And you have the democratic will to be able to choose it in your various states. And even back then, we knew that those arguments were bullshit because, at the end of the day, all these states' rights arguments actually mean is you look at the makeup of a lot of these conservatively held state legislatures across the country. Well, how are they dominated by conservatives? I mean, overwhelmingly, it's because they have essentially gerrymandered the fuck out of all of these districts, usually explicitly along racial lines. And they've entrenched themselves with minority rule in a lot of these states and basically set it up so that it's impossible for them to lose those majorities. And they're utilizing that fact and utilizing the states' rights argument to enforce what is essentially just a theocratic right-wing reactionary agenda on the constituents within these states. And you can also go and look at the various polling data on some of these policies that they've been passing. I think it was the one that was just passed recently in Texas, where it had literally like an 11% approval rating among the people in Texas. So it's like they know this is unpopular. And Lindsey Graham coming out here and just saying the quiet part out loud and saying, no, we are going to make this election about abortion. We are, if we take back the House and the Senate, we are going to aggressively push for a federal abortion ban. That's absolutely going to scare the shit out of everybody across the board. And I think that, was an absolutely catastrophic mistake from the perspective of Republicans. And that, Mitch McConnell is behind the scenes absolutely losing his goddamn mind over this. Same as when, that ghoulish apparition Rick Scott came out with his own policy framework, and you looked at it and he was like saying how he wanted to increase taxes on poor people and cut taxes for the rich. And Mitch McConnell's like, God, listen, you're not supposed to be saying this shit out loud, right? We're supposed to kind of come up with our own narratives and figure out ways to lie to people about why this is justified. You're not just supposed to say it, man. And this is a complete repeat of that for Lindsey Graham.
Yeah, like we have dog whistles for these things, man. You don't have to say it.
Right.
I'm also curious what you think about. It seems like there are some candidates that are uniquely bad at the Senate level on the Republican side. I'm thinking mostly about Oz and Herschel Walker. Just really like that. That's not just my opinion of their politics. They are just bad candidates. I'm curious how much of an impact you think that has. I've seen some reporting about Trump endorsed both of them, and McConnell reportedly being unhappy with those candidates, and Trump scared they're going to lose. And it's been a little bit entertaining to see some of this on the right. So I'm just curious what your thoughts are there.
Yeah, I mean, I got one of them here in my home state of Georgia, this motherfucker Herschel Walker. I mean, it's not even just your opinion or my opinion or Mitch McConnell's opinion that these guys are bad candidates. You just had, I don't know if you saw it the other day, there was an article about how Herschel Walker was openly coming out and saying that if he debated Raphael Warnock, that he's too stupid to be able to win a debate with him. He was literally saying this. He was basically saying, I'm too stupid to win a debate against this guy. And if I go and do it, he's going to run circles around me and embarrass the shit out of me. It's like they know that they're bad candidates. I mean, Herschel Walker specifically, not to like disparage anybody who's, going through some mental troubles, but this is a guy who has like an extremely troubling past, to say the least. I mean, this is a guy who has almost killed people, pointed guns at people's heads, been a wife beater in his past, all of these different various things. He himself says that he is not, mentally stable at times. So, at the end of the day, I don't know how anybody is even remotely thinking that this guy would be an acceptable senator. But somehow you look at the polling data and it's still like pretty tight here in Georgia. I mean, I've been seeing some recent polls that show him even with a lead over Raphael Warnock. And I think part of that reason is, well, number one, I mean, Herschel Walker is just such a gigantic name in the state of Georgia because he played for UGA and he has a lot of that, reputation behind the scenes. So I think his name alone is carrying him a very long distance. And the more that people see him in front of a camera, the less support that he's going to have, or the less motivation people will be having to go out and actually show up to the polls to vote for this guy. But I also think that if you look at the difference in terms of the strategic approach between Herschel Walker's campaign and Dr. Oz's campaign. If you look at the advertisements that they're blasting Raphael Warnock with, it's all focused on Joe Biden. It's all focused on inflation in the economy. And it's definitely a better campaign approach than what Dr. Oz is doing, which is basically just to try to go out there and say that John Fetterman is the reincarnation of the most popular fucking senator that we have in this country, Bernie Sanders, and talking about how he supports, John Fetterman supports legalizing weed and Medicare for all and like, free public college. It's like, listen, man, I don't know if you know this, but people in Pennsylvania overwhelmingly support those policies. Like you're basically running ads for John Fetterman while also going out and doing all of these, cringe advertisements and like, making yourself look like an absolute elitist and just embarrassing yourself on a regular basis. So I think that they're bad candidates in very different ways. But at the same time, I mean, credit to John Fetterman and his campaign for just running an absolute banger of a campaign so far. I mean, that's part of the reason why I think that his margin of victory is, significantly higher than what Raphael Warnock's is. Warnock is just kind of like, to me at least, even him coming from my home state, I just don't really see him that much. Like he's not like, he's not out there, aggressively making arguments. He's not terrible on policy, right? Obviously, he's no Bernie Sanders, but he's also no, Nancy Pelosi or Chuck Schumer. And I just wish that he would like, more aggressively talk about the actual semi-left policies that he does support and stop trying to basically like hide in the background, I guess, and sort of be more aggressive in confronting Herschel Walker. Or in all likelihood, I think that, John Fetterman will probably win his race, but I think that it's definitely possible that Herschel Walker ends up taking this Senate seat in Georgia.
And was it Kelly Loeffler that ran against him the first time around?
Yeah.
I remember her using a line of attack that actually made me really like Warnock. It was him preaching like Marxism. And I was like, oh, really?
Yeah.
Like,
and she kept saying like radical liberal Raphael Warnock in the debates and shit.
Yeah. I was like, wait, this guy might be more left than I thought. I had seen some polling that that Brian Kemp is doing a lot better than Herschel Walker is. And I'm just curious what your take on, they're both obviously statewide elections here in Georgia. Is that because Kemp has shied away from Trump a little bit and Walker obviously being full-throatedly endorsed by Trump? What's your take on the distinction there?
I think that could go both ways, sort of be like a double-edged sword, because there's definitely a coalition in Georgia that like of Republicans who despise Brian Kemp for, not, sucking on Trump's dick as much as other people have. So there's definitely a coalition that I think might not show up to the polls to vote for Brian Kemp at the end of the day. But also I think that it's just that Stacey Abrams, I mean, she obviously has a pretty big platform here in Georgia. She's been running with her organizing and electoral organization that she has here to get out the vote and shit like that. But honestly, I mean, maybe this is just my position as a leftist in this state, but I just don't think she's that inspiring. I don't think that, she's going to be willing to bring together the coalition that would be necessary to get Kemp out of office. I just think that at this point, I mean, it'll be a close election, but she's just not really got that much going for her. And I don't think that the political environment right now within the state of Georgia, because there's so many Republicans who have just absolutely lost their minds after two Senate seats in this state flipped to Democratic control for like the first time ever. I think that it's not exactly lining up for Stacey Abrams to be able to pull off that upset right now.
Mm-hmm. And speaking of Stacey Abrams, she was kind of hailed as the Democrats' hero and the person who was going to, figure out the strategies to take down Republicans because she was apparently involved in the Georgia races there a couple of years ago. What are your thoughts on her more broadly? To me, it seems like that was really just a product of circumstance more than anything. But you obviously living in the state would have a lot better idea than I do.
Yeah, no, I mean, I don't want to take away completely from her, because I do think that her organizing or her organization that she has here in terms of like getting people registered to vote, I mean, they've done a lot, right? They've done a lot in terms of just getting people registered to vote for the Democratic Party. But, in terms of who she actually is as a person, I mean, let's just remind ourselves, okay, this is somebody who took, I think it was a multi-million-dollar donation from Mike Bloomberg back during the 2020 Democratic primaries, and then turned around and basically did a semi-endorsement of basically the most corrupt motherfucker in that primary, aside from Joe Biden, obviously. But I mean, the idea to me that you would be willing to sell out to somebody like Mike Bloomberg, okay, a literal billionaire who's been a conservative his entire life, who's just trying to buy the presidency. I mean, straight up had a completely astroturfed campaign. Nobody liked that guy. And the fact that you were willing to sell out and sort of give a tacit endorsement of him, to me, pretty much just says everything. I mean, she is, hungry for power. She is somebody who just wants to be in some higher position. And I don't really see her being somebody, even if she did win this seat, being somebody who is going to like aggressively push for any leftist or progressive policies, maybe outside of like electoral reforms and things like that within Georgia. So, I mean, I just don't see her as somebody who's really that inspiring. I think she's definitely been significantly overhyped by liberals over the last couple of years.
Yeah. And then the last thing I wanted to ask you about, I'm curious what your thoughts are in terms of if the Democrats were to have a more successful midterm than we may be thinking. Suppose they, for the sake of argument, suppose they even manage to just barely hold on to the House and gain a couple of seats in the Senate. What position do you think? Because I'm a little bit cynical about them, and I think that they kind of are looking forward to being able to throw their hands up and say, sorry, we don't have the power to do X, Y, or Z. How do you think they would respond to actually still having the power to do a few things? Do you see any chance of there being pressure from the left to get them to take some action, or how do you see that going?
I mean, I think it's possible. I think that you always got to watch out for the rotating villain. And the fact of the matter is, if you had, let's say 2 more senators that were added to the Democratic Party and you had like a 52-48 split, there's definitely more than 2 Democratic senators who are not going to be willing to go along with more progressive agenda items, right? We can think of some just right off the top of our heads. We got Joe Manchin, we got Kirsten Sinema, we have, so many other people who would be willing to throw their name in the ring in terms of joining a corporate Democrat coalition before being willing to go forward with progressive legislation. So, I mean, I think definitely, maybe if you have somebody like John Fetterman in there, who's in there fighting alongside Bernie Sanders, I think you would have probably a higher likelihood of doing things like maybe getting rid of the filibuster. If that happens, that opens the door to a whole lot more in legislation that could be accomplished. So, I mean, it really just depends on like who specifically gets in there, what the margins actually are. Are you still going to have a lot of those rotating villains stepping up to the plate? But I think that, it would be a different situation that you have right now, because right now you really do just have a 50-50 split. And so Democrats have, been relentlessly pushing this idea that like, oh, Joe Biden has absolutely no power whatsoever. He doesn't even have an outright majority. What is he supposed to do? There's only so much that he can do in a moment like this. So I think that you could have, more significant pushback against those types of arguments if they do pick up a couple Senate seats. But I don't think that it's, if they pick up a couple here and there, that they're going to like dramatically go off on this FDR style, reform agenda or something like that. I think it'll pretty much be like relatively the same type of legislation that we've been getting so far, like, bipartisan agenda items and watered down and means tested to various policies. So I don't think it would like dramatically change the landscape one way or another.
And I know I said last question last time, real last question this time. The train situation, the strikes. How do you see this impacting November? If that strike were to go forward and there were economic ramifications, does that backfire on Democrats and Biden, or how do you view that?
I mean, it depends on how they want to go about taking this fight. I mean, from the beginning, I was saying even before, this PEB board that Joe Biden put together came up with this like, a temporary solution or a temporary plan that they put forward, which it seems like, at least in terms of what I've seen, that over 90% of the actual workers think is an absolutely dog shit deal. But even before that deal came out, between the union representation and between the business side of this, you had a window of opportunity there where Joe Biden, instead of sort of having these behind closed doors meetings with these people, he could have used the bully pulpit. I mean, he could have gone out there and just laid out the facts, similar to how Bernie Sanders did, where you have a handful of these companies that have been consolidating these rail lines for decades now. They've been spending virtually all of their cash on straight up stock buybacks, like tens of billions of dollars. I mean, I think it was the number that Bernie cited was like $180 billion on stock buybacks between these various companies over about the last decade or so. And in the meantime, they're actually trying to come out here and argue that they can't afford to give their workers, for example, one of the demands that they had was 15 paid sick days. 15 paid sick days, okay? That represents 3% of their annual profits, 3%. And they're turning around and saying, oh, we can't afford that. can't afford it. You've been spending billions and billions of dollars purely just on enriching your shareholders, while you've been cutting back the amount of people who are working on these rail lines, while you've been forcing them to work in absolutely ridiculous and unsafe, straight up dangerous situations that they are put in, where some of these people have to work on these trains for like 10, 11, 12 hours at a time straight with no break. They have no sleep because their schedules are so completely fucked up. They have again, no paid time off, and even before these negotiations started, didn't even have unpaid time off because they have this point system there that penalizes them for like getting sick or having to go and see the doctor or taking care of their children or whatever. So I mean, you really did have an opportunity here where Biden could have actually demonstrated what a pro-union president looks like, but he's trying to portray himself as the most pro-union president in modern American history. Meanwhile, he's going and basically giving like 90% to whatever these rail line corporations are asking for. I mean, it's completely fucking pathetic. They offered them one paid sick day in this deal. I mean, that is a slap in the face to all of these workers. And I agree with you that I hope that, they do reject this deal, and I hope that they do go on strike. And, maybe that does end up hurting Democrats in the midterm elections. It would definitely fuck up our supply chain and bring that to a screeching halt. But again, you have an opportunity there for Democrats, for Joe Biden, to come out and lay out the fact that this is not the fault of the workers. Okay. The workers have been dealing with this bullshit for years now. Okay. They've had their lives ruined. They haven't been able to see their families. Okay. This is the fault of these corporations who are refusing to even give these workers the crumbs that they are trying to ask for right now. That's where the blame resides. But as of right now, it does seem like you have some corporate Democrats teaming up with Republicans to basically make this more so about, the American economy and how these workers are going to damage it, and that's going to cause all these other ripple effects. Well, okay, if you think that it's that big of a threat, then tell these companies to meet their fucking demands, because they're nothing crazy. I mean, they're asking for a tiny fraction of what every other major OECD country around the world has guaranteed to all of their workers across the board. I mean, it really is just a, pathetic anti-union display that I've been seeing right now from the Biden administration on this.
Yeah, absolutely. And to your point, I think 15 is even crumbs. That to me is that should be bare minimum. That's not acceptable. You should get double that at least in terms of and also for people like we see train wrecks all the time that are like very dangerous. This is kind of like pilots. Like, do you want your pilot or your train the person running your train, you want them tired and like overworked? And I mean, it's ridiculous policy all around. Coming from the Biden administration and the feds. Matt, can you just reiterate for the audience where they can find your work?
Yeah, I mean, you could just look me up on Twitter, on YouTube, on Twitch. It's all just the same Good Politic Guy. Just, look me up there and give me a follow.
Sweet. Thank you so much for taking the time as always. Look forward to talking to you soon.
Yeah, for sure, man.